Today on the CEO Barbecue, we're looking for critical minerals as well as gold in Newfoundland in Canada, together with Canterra minerals. If you want a bullet point summary of this and all the other CEO barbecues in your inbox once a week, go to resourcetalks.com and subscribe to our free newsletter. Now, although the company you're about to hear from has not paid us for the production of this interview, you should still not treat this video as research. Research is conducted by reading the company's official filings, which you can find on setterplus.ca. In any case, please only watch this if you absolutely know what you're doing. This interview is intended only for experienced junior mining speculators because mineral exploration, development, and mining is an extremely tough business where failure is the norm and should be the expectation. This is going to be a conversation that is general and impersonal in nature, and it is also going to contain forward-looking statements. I am not a licensed financial advisor, and my business sells content-producing services, which also makes me biased. Although this company has not paid for the production of this interview, it doesn't mean they won't become a client in the future. They might. So before continuing on, please talk to an independent investment advisor with a good long-term track record because your capital might be at risk. If you're not 100% sure you understand 100% of the disclaimers I just showed you, please go to the last section of this video and do not consume this content unless you fully understand and agree with everything said therein. That all said, Canterra is listed as CTM on the TSX Ventures Exchange, where the average 3-month volume is about 670,000 shares. The stock's 52-week high is 18 cents and its 52-week low is 4 cents. With a market cap of just over 51 million Canadian dollars and 344 million shares outstanding, today this is a 15-cent stock with a 50 and a 200-day moving average at respectively 10.6 and 9.1 cents, which means the stock is now trading well above both of them. Moving on to the share structure, insiders here are noted as owning just about 2% of the company, whereas Michael Gentile and Eric Sprott each own 4% of the company. And Buchans Resources, the parent company here, I suppose they own 10% of Canterra now, which leaves about 80% of the company in the hands of retail and institutions. I also see 35 million warrants and 7 million options with a respective average strike price of 7 cents and 21 cents, bringing the number of fully diluted shares to 385.4 million, meaning an increase of about 12% in shares outstanding could happen if all dilutive securities get exercised, which would then result in about an 11% ownership dilution if, that is always a big if, but if all dilutive securities get exercised. And of course, none of this accounts for potential dilution down the road, which is not unlikely given that this is a pre-revenue company that operates in what is a very capital-intensive industry. Talking about capital, I'll now go through their latest financial statement, which shows me the numbers as of March 31st, 2025. So do note, this is about 6 months ago. They've done a lot of work since, so the financial situation will be different. At the time, though, the company had in total about 4.8 million Canadian dollars in current assets. It was mostly in the form of cash and cash equivalents to the tune of $3.6 million, as well as they had some marketable securities recorded at $1 million at the time, and mostly consisting of Star Diamond Corp shares. The price of Star Diamond, though, has unfortunately halved in the last 6 months. In terms of liabilities, the current liabilities side of the balance sheet shows about $1.1 million on it, but close to half of it is not actual debt. It's a deferred flow-through premium liability, which means that's not money they actually have to pay unless they don't spend their money. But again, this is exploration, so nobody's having a hard time spending any money. And the actual debt here was about $613,000 at the time, and it was in account payables, but there's no long-term debt whatsoever. Moving on to the P&L for the 3 months that ended on March 31st, the total amount recorded as expenses showed up as $1.6 million, but that includes some non-cash expenses, so just under $75,000 of share-based compensation. So I'm just going to round it down to about $1.5 million of expenses, of which 1.2 million went toward exploration, and just under 80% of the money that the 1.2 million is just under 80% of the money that goes toward exploration. And so just over 20% goes toward what I call administration. That means that the administrative spend was about $110,000 a month on average during that period. with the largest chunk of that money going toward wages and consulting fees for about 46% of the overall administrative spend. And then there's a little bit of marketing and travel representing about 34% of the overall spend as well. Note 6 of the financials provides us the breakdown of that $1.2 million exploration spend, where I can see that close to 2/3 or 65% to be specific of that money went toward geology and geophysics of the Buchans mine, and most of the rest went toward drilling at Buchans. Again, they have been drilling over the last 3 months as well. So the actual last 3 months, not the last reported 3 months. So that number might be different there as well. And we'll talk about that extensively later on. But this puts them, again, on a roughly 80-20 split for exploration to administration, as well as about a 2-to-1 ratio for marketing to drilling specifically, meaning twice as much money went toward drilling as it did into marketing. But it is really almost 10 times as much money going into the ground if you count the geology and geophysical work as well. And again, probably different this time, but we'll talk about that later on. As always, though, I would also like to remind you to be cautious. Your capital may be at risk, so you have to visit setterplus.ca and view the company's full financials for yourself, and specifically pay attention to their full year financials once those become available. Enough accounting for now, though, because I've got a brief overview of the company here. And ultimately, the story of Canterra is one of multiple commodities, but it is focused on Newfoundland. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the work is now going into Buchans, which is a brownfields VMS camp anchored by the pit-constrained Lundenberg stockwork deposit and multiple neobrite targets like Sandfill and Clementine, where, by the way, recent drilling, very recent actually, just from a couple of days ago, has returned 16 meters of 1.7% copper equivalent. And this is where the critical metals label comes from as well. So that's something we'll definitely talk about. Second project, just briefly, Canterra is the Wilding Gold Project. It's a 55-kilometer stretch along the Valentine Lake Shear Zone, and it's directly adjacent to Equinox Gold's now producing Valentine mine, where for Canterra, 2025 fieldwork has showed some interesting grab samples, which hopefully we'll get to touch upon at the latter part of the conversation, as I'd better like to understand whether the optionality here can be realized during what seems to be a gold bull market right now. And also, of course, we'll talk about other stuff: metallurgy risk, discovery potential, need for money, permits, locus, geology, history, all of that hopefully later on in the conversation. But for this to actually become a conversation, I'll have to shut up already, Chris, and I'll give you the word here. But first of all, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Yeah, thanks, Antonio, for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Pleasure is mine. And since this is your first time on the barbecue, we'll have to go through the smell test first. But just before that, I want to ask you kind of a broad question here, which is essentially, why should I care about Canterra at this price, given that, again, in a bull market, there are many opportunities out there. And also Buchans has been worked on in the past. It has been around. I mean, it was operation up until 1984, I believe. So some other companies tried to bring it back since, but ultimately didn't. So why Canterra and why now?
I think Canterra and Newfoundland in general is a great place to be developing a mine or an exploration project right now. We've seen that with Equinox successfully putting Valentine into production, Newfound buying Maritime, and our peers, Firefly Metals and the massive sulfide deposit style, having great success in expanding upon that former mine at Ming. And so it's really, in all of North America, I think, along with Quebec, it's the best place with the least amount of red tape to actively get out, ensure all the dollars go into the ground to exploration, and ultimately make a discovery that could become a mine and you could actually build it.
Mm-hmm. That's a short and sweet answer. I like it. And we'll definitely be back to some of the stuff that you said in there. And I do have to get to that smell test going. But just one thing, do people ever confuse Canterra with Centerra?
Yeah, it's a happy mistake when it happens. And I'm like, often might not correct them straight away. Like, yes, I'm the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar miner. But yeah, I didn't pick the Canterra name. It already existed. But yes, it happens quite regularly.
What does it mean? What does Canterra mean? Because I mean, can has that kind of tin vibe, I suppose, and there's no tin on your project.
Yeah, Terra means Earth and can means Canada. So I
That's
don't know.
fair.
That's as much as I know.
That's simple enough, even for me. Even I can understand it. That's fair. Let's do get to the smell test, or let's get that going here. Now, I'll be starting off with yourself as the CEO of the company. Who are you, and why do you think you're the right man for the job?
I'm I'm a geologist by background and training, so I cut my teeth, jumping out of helicopters, chasing bears all across the Canadian North, looking for gold and then copper, and then traded my rock hammer for a suit, and ultimately, that armed me with both the technical knowledge and the business side, which is very important to have as well, because you can have the best project in the world, but if you don't have the right structure going into it, the company, might not make people money. And so I have both those things, which for art, where Canterra is, and really sort of resource slash exploration stage, I think it's important to have someone that has a sound technical understanding so they can oversee what the technical team is doing as far as exploration and development and, help guide them and ultimately make the right hard decisions. And I find other CEOs who maybe don't have the technical background, um, it often hurts the companies in a lot of ways because they fully have to trust their technical people completely and can't really ask the hard questions.
Yeah. Having done a couple of site visits myself this year, I do find that jumping out of helicopters is way more fun than jumping on stage to give a PowerPoint presentation.
It is a lot of fun, fraught with risk though, and you get tired of the risk after a while. So it's all fun and games early on, but eventually you start doing the statistics in your head, and like at some point, you know, my number is going to be up as far as getting in a helicopter incident, which most of the geologists I know that are older than me have unfortunately had to be there. And I guess I got out before any serious incident. I had a couple close calls, but
Helicopters are a wild thing. I mean, the stories that I heard from the guys on site is we can do a whole podcast on that alone, I think.
yeah, no, definitely we could, with the number of close calls and doing stupid things you probably should have said no to, or at least foresaw what's going to be the wrong decision. And then, but it's a bit like, motorsports in a way. They're like, like race cars in the air.
Well, I've been in junior mining now just a couple of years, but I do have my fair share of experience with doing stupid things. So I'm becoming a bit of an expert in that as well. Chris, do you currently hold any other positions, executive or board positions with other companies? Do you do anything else besides Canterra?
I do not, which is proving to hurt me now, given like at this point, I think we're in a bull, safe to say we're in a bull market, and having as many irons in the fire stands to benefit. However, I'm a firm believer in, if you're going to do a junior explorer, especially if you're going to do it well or do it right, it's really got to be your full priority. And so Canterra is my entire net worth. Well, not entire, but most of it, a huge chunk. And so I'm motivated both financially and with incentives to make it work and take advantage of this bull market. So I stick to Canterra and try to put everything I have into it to try to make it successful.
I'm glad you brought that up off the bat because it is something I oftentimes ask about, and the way oftentimes CEOs would more or less show off to me is like, oh, I've put $2 million into this company, but at the same time, I wonder and I ask it, but is that significant to you? It's a lot of money to me,
Right.
obviously, but is 2 million, like if you have $100 million and that's 2 million, is that really a lot of it to you. And so I'm happy you put it that way, as it being most of your net worth. What do you own? Because insider ownership is noted at 2%. How much of that is you?
Just shy of 1%, I think these days. It might actually still be 1%. I don't know, I haven't looked in a while, but yeah.
Is what's the average cost of those shares that bought and paid for? Or did you get them as incentives? How did that work?
Uh, Both. So Canterra was a pubco originally, and more or less a shell. And then myself and a few others had a private co that had acquired the gold ground in Newfoundland adjoining Equinox from Altius back in 2019. And so Canterra bought the private co that myself and some other mining people were a part of. So certainly I had shares there. And then in our first financing, I put, for me, like a big bet in like 20 grand or 25,000. I don't remember now. That's a big bet for me. And so my cost basis is probably 10 cents or something like that.
Hmm. Again, happy that you're bringing that up as well, and that you're being open about it. I do typically ask, what is your cost basis? What's kind of the average there? 2% insider ownership is in general going to be seen as on the lower end, not only in the industry, but in general. I'm sure that's something you hear as well. So now that we finally seem to be seeing a bit of the light in the bull market, and again, you're planning a lot of work, you've done a lot of work, there's new discoveries and stuff like that we'll talk about. Do you plan to be, or do you have the ability to be in the open market and buying some Canterra stock?
I was just before we started drilling in earnest this year. It was small buys, but I was trying to squeeze in. At 7 cents, I thought we were screaming buy, and I hadn't got traction on everything we had achieved in our 5 years. So I started buying, but then we started drilling. So of course, blacked out until we finished drilling. So certainly once we're through blackout here and through the 10,000 meters, something myself and insiders will look to do again. And yeah.
Mentioning some of the other insiders interesting to me as well. Maybe you can talk to me about who's on your board. That's not something that's discussed enough out there, in my opinion. So yeah, who's on your board, and have they made money for shareholders before?
Yeah. So first and foremost, our chairman, Andrew Farncombe, investment banker by background, and so he's very involved. Basically, him and I more or less co-founded what is Canterra today, and have worked together to bring in all of our asset base now, which now totals 7 resource stage deposits, pardon me, basically tying up all the metal in the ground outside of Equinox and Tech's former Duck Pond mine in central Newfoundland. So he's very involved, and I believe he owns 6 million shares, and he's participated in pretty much every financing from since inception, including our last one, which was almost a year ago now, last in December 2024.
Do any of them, or you personally, or any of the other insiders personally, own a royalty on any of the projects that you have?
No, no. And so, and the other directors, so that's Josh Surface, Nick Coleman, who's a Newfoundlander and well-respected business person in St. John's, Josh Surface. Basically, what we've done here, Antonio, is Canterra had a very old or senior board, let's put it that way, when I became CEO, and we tried to make it more youthful. And in my opinion, when I invest in junior explorers and developers, if I look at the board management team and like everyone's got 50 plus years, I start to wonder, how hard are they really going to be hustling to make this work, especially if they've already made money? And so, the best way to look at Canterra's board, myself, Andrew, Josh, Joanne, Nick, and Mike Power, not so much Mike because he's a nominee from Buchans, is we're young and hungry. And give me young and hungry every time when it comes to exploration and exploration development.
Mm. But Chris, I thought you were supposed to have 1,000 years of combined experience on the board.
Yeah, that's right. Every board has 100 years or whatever combined experience, and is a tier one team. But no, I look at like Integra Gold, which Steve DeJong was like late 20s when he became CEO and successfully ultimately sold that to Eldorado. Look at Snowline today with Birdall and Thomas Branson as VPX. Thomas is sort of same age as me, similar background, and so yeah, I think there's at a certain stage, and especially the exploration phase, youth and hunger go a long way, as long as there's the operational experience to back it up, because so much of the risk in our companies is execution. Most companies have at least a good project. Maybe not all of their projects are good, but one of them is probably, the flagship and has some potential, but it ultimately comes down to executing, whether that's the permitting risk or just getting permits, but then also being able to effectively, contract helicopters, drill rigs, and staff them to ultimately execute on your exploration ideas.
I think I'm gonna delete that part about Steve being in his late 20s and doing those things with Integra because it puts me to shame. But other than that,
It puts me to shame too. It was pretty remarkable.
Jokes aside, though, no, I agree, and you do bring up good points and stuff that I've been thinking about as well. Talk to me more about incentives, though. I mean, incentives, specifically 2025 incentives, because of what you're doing now and 10,000 meters of drilling. How do you measure success internally, and why I'm asking that is because I'm trying to better understand how executive and director compensation is going to be determined to reflect that potential success, and what your KPIs are going to be based on, so that you can keep everyone again motivated and hungry and hustling, as you said.
Yeah, so the board just as of last year gets DSUs, so it previously wasn't compensated at all. You were just there to be a part of what we were building in Newfoundland. So a new critical minerals, the second largest critical minerals resource stage, at least, developer. And now that, we've got the resources under our belt, and, there's more requirements out of the board from quarter to quarter, they're getting compensated as DSUs to keep our hard dollar cash burn. So we're paying with direct share units, which will, hopefully incentivize them to continue contributing at the board level to make those DSUs ultimately worth something when we're successful at the drill bit and making a new discovery, or ultimately bought out. And then from like the employee side, so the exploration staff, myself, we do an annual equity incentive grant, which everyone sort of gets. The compensation committee determines, the ultimate quantum that's appropriate, and then it's up to the board to determine the KPIs, as you put it. And for exploration, that's, did we make a new discovery, or significant gains on getting to that point, and then even if not, there's some points granted for executing efficiently, being on budget, or even under budget, and then ultimately, being first and foremost delivering safe programs, and keeping ourselves in line as far as permitting and looking ahead, because we have such a large land position to mitigating that risk as much as possible by effectively, spreading our expenditures efficiently around, so that our I guess our risk as far as dollars to hold all of these deposits is kept as low as possible.
You said something there that made me think, which is a rarity for me. But it's
Come on now.
you said selling or developing this asset, and this is a good segue into talking specifically about the business plan here. Going back also to some of the things that you said at the beginning there about Newfoundland, but what is the business strategy here for Canterra? Where do you really want to take this? Are you looking to become a developer yourself, or would you be seeking sort of an exit, hopefully during this bull market?
That's a good question. We're not built as a developer right now. Like if you look at our board and technical composition, none of us have ever built a mine. And so, I'm a firm believer that, an exploration company that suddenly decides they're just going to go build it, that's probably not going to go well, or at least in my experience, I've never seen it go real well, unless then they do something to restructure everything as far as the team, which then okay, fair enough. So we're set up to explore. Yes, we have resources, 26 million tons in indicated, and they're across 7 deposits, and so in these VMS or massive sulfide districts, oftentimes you have one big deposit, which for us is Buchans, and that anchors a development decision if it becomes big enough or high enough grade. And then all the other satellite deposits are more or less paid for and can work into a hub and spoke mining methodology as you sort of progress down the track. And so to answer your question directly, right now we're at a point where 26 million tons of indicated plus a little bit of inferred isn't big enough in my opinion. And so we're exploring. We acquired these assets because we think there's the potential to get to 40 million tons, or that's sort of, I think, the test mark for a VMS sort of series of deposits or district. So to get there, we need to explore. And so that's what we're doing. And that's what we're built to do.
Talk to me more about that point. I want to follow up on that because 40 million tons, between 40 and 50 million tons, I suppose, is where the magic number is for VMSs. What else does a deposit have to look like from a grade as well as the tonnage perspective? But also, you said, is it one deposit? Is it multiple? And how do you see that happening for you?
I think, like if you look at the past mines that have operated in central Newfoundland district, it was Buchans, so that was 16 million tons at incredibly high grade. Averaged 28% combined base metals, which is incredible. It was one of the highest grade massive sulfide mines in the world during its operating history. And then from there, an order of magnitude smaller, the next mine with Duck Pond at 5 million tons, and it operated at about 3% copper equivalent, like 15% zinc equivalent, something like that. And it was 5 million tons. So, an order of magnitude smaller Buchans, but it was still, a successful underground mine. So Buchans right now is the biggest at 17 million tons. And so we believe there's room there. We could get to 20 million tons, probably no problem. That was a resource done in 2019. But why we purchased it and gave up, 60% of Canterra to get it, is we thought there was the potential there for a significant discovery on the order of the massive sulfide lenses they used to mine there. So another 5 million ton ore body of that ultra high grade 28%. And so if we're successful in making that discovery, There's already positive economics around the Lundberg stockwork resource, which you highlighted in the preamble. Um, but if we're successful in making even a 1 million ton high grade discovery, that fundamentally changes the economics behind sort of the bulk tonnage Lundberg resource. So that's, I guess there's sort of two goals there, right? Make the high grade discovery to augment the existing resource base in sort of the 1 million ton range, or make a whole new massive sulfide lens discovery, which in the Buchans camp was sort of 3 million tons to 5 million tons.
Mhm.
And so that's what we're doing right now with these 10,000 meters.
It might be worth talking about if it works out the way you hope it's going to be. Who does this? Who's a potential suitor? I mean, Equinox is just put something in production in Newfoundland, close to your other project, as I mentioned earlier. But they're there, and they're a bigger company. We see Newfound Gold themselves. It'll be interesting to see what they achieve with their what is it, 23 pits, I think they're dealing with. So who does Newfoundland and an asset like the one that you're hoping to discover, who does that fit with? Is this a mid-sized company that we're talking about? And yeah, who would be a potential suitor if you do go the exit route?
It's a good question. You know, VMS was often, or massive sulfide deposits in recent times weren't really, everyone wanted porphyry copper, wanted the big deposit, right? Really, it was like Hud Bay that really only made a name for themselves. But now we're seeing they're coming back in vogue as, capitalization or capex costs of big porphyry deposits kind of get out of control in this inflationary environment. So small tonnage but high grade massive sulfide deposits, that becomes more attractive. And so you're seeing like the Bolidens of the world be really successful, making more purchases for VMS deposits. South 32, likes VMS deposits and operates them across the world. And maybe there's room for an emerging mid-tier that starts putting some of these together. But for the moment, you look at sort of South 32, Bulletin, and other companies like them, Hud Bay, that have sort of made their bread and butter on massive sulfide mining.
Going back to what we talked about, having maybe a board with more gray beards on. What they also have is friends in high places oftentimes. And it is a bit of an old buddies industry. I mean, there's no going about that. What about yourself? Do you have any old buddies, or do you have an open line of conversation with some of the companies you're mentioning here?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've had lots, Randy Turner, who, he was the CEO of Canterra. Canterra was a diamond explorer. He's still on our technical board. He's been around a long time, sold Snap Lake to De Beers really successfully. And some other, he's had some other gold wins. So yeah, keeping like our technical advisory board sort of with a lot of the gray hair is important. But also it just comes back to sort of, myself, Josh, and Andrew have an extensive network in mining because it is who as you say. And so, certainly, I think I don't want to speak to exactly, what CAs we have or don't have, but, Buchans, when you talk about a massive sulfide deposit, Buchans is one of the best. And so all the major mining companies know it. And, the feedback I get over and over again about Canterra is, oh yeah, you put together all those massive sulfide deposits in Newfoundland. And then I tell them, no, we actually bought Buchans after we put in sort of the smaller ones. And then they're like, you own Buchans? And so that's, that immediately registers with, anyone who's well versed in massive sulfide development.
And yet they all agree to call it Buchans and not Buchans or something like that, which to
Yeah,
me would
yeah,
actually make more sense. Uh,
yeah.
Jokes aside, though, to the point of Buchans, you said Buchans was, one of the best ones, or one of the ones that you start thinking about when you start thinking about VMSs. Talk to me about the history of the asset, as that may open a broader perspective as well. But again, as I mentioned earlier, produced up until 1984. What happened since, and why isn't it producing today, essentially?
Yeah, it's a good question. Asarco discovered it. It was one of the first sort of geophysics discoveries, I think. One of the lenses was, anyway, like rudimentary geophysics in the early 1920s. So 1924, I think, uh, Lucky Strike, where the head frame still exists today, was discovered by Asarco, and then they put it in production somehow by 1926. So and then they discovered Oriental and some of the other deposits. So Asarco then mined it for 50 years, and then it was tapering off. And as you point out, by 84, that was it. They closed it mostly because metal prices had obviously collapsed in the late 70s there, but ultimately they had mined out Lucky Strike and then chased the mineralization down to around 900 meters, a kilometer and a bit to the northwest. And they kind of reached the end of the ore that they had known about at that time.
Well, when there's nothing else wrong with it, then in that case, I mean, community relations or something else. Maybe talk to me about, in your case, like how many groups are you dealing with, and what does that look like right now? Your agreements and everything.
Uh, so sorry, the question was just like
There was really no question. I should have put it better. You're right. You're right. That's fair. But how are community relations there for you now? And are there any type of legacy issues with the community?
it's a good question, not one I'm asked often, but the town of Buchans was built to support the mine, right? Asarco built it to actually, be able to develop those 50 years. And so today the mayor has the head frame on his business card. The town obviously isn't as flourishing as it was, although now Equinox has helped that a bit. But it was few thousand people, let's say, and now it's like 600. So they desperately, at least the messaging we always get is, we hope you're successful in making a new discovery here. And that would revitalize the town. But also, central Newfoundland as a whole, like, has seen, after Duck Pond closed, and up until Equinox, it's just dwindling population as more people move to sort of St. John's and some of the bigger cities, Corner Brook, Gander. And yeah, I guess from, community relations, like in town, after, the one restaurant there is certainly happy for our business. And we employ quite a few of the townspeople, because they're all the best. The best part about central Newfoundland is they've worked in Buchans, they worked at Tex Duck Pond thereafter. So they're well versed in mineral exploration and mining. So they're technically capable. When we first started in central Newfoundland, the mayor of the small town just down the road was our core logger. She had worked at Duck Pond. And that's the first time in my career that's ever happened. I never had like a geologist who was acting as mayor of the small community, who I could actually hire and instantly have that community relations win. And then the second part of your question, the legacy issues. The best thing about Newfoundland and Labrador as a province is, with all of these former mines, Buchans, Hopebrook, there's probably some others on the island. They took liability of the historic site, so the old head frame, and some of the other 1920s through to 80s issues that had cropped up. And so the Newfoundland and Labrador government have have now full liability of the historic site. And so only when if we're successful in making a new discovery that can prove to be a new mine, then you work with the government to sort of figure out how the mine plan can you know remediate or utilize the old head frame. Probably not, but something like that.
I'm going to follow up on what you just said, but as you were talking, I was actually looking up the town of Buchans and the restaurant that you were talking about. Is it on 12 Main Street?
I think so. I don't know. It's just like it's one block from the only hotel.
It's like a reddish building, is it?
Yeah,
It's
yeah. I
for
think it's called the
sale.
everything in Newfoundland's always for central Newfoundland's for sale.
And it's
Because
150,000 Canadian, which is well, being in Western Europe myself, it's a surprising price for real estate that can also be used commercial, but it does look like a cool restaurant. So,
yeah, I think it's called the Buccaneer. I want to say.
uh,
Might
okay,
be
I have
wrong.
something else. I have the Boardwalk Bistro. Maybe there's
Oh,
two.
maybe it was called the Buccaneer and it's renamed. Yeah.
um, Interesting little thing. Cool looking place. It seems like the town is okay. I mean, it's not as bad or anything as I would imagine. How close are you to the town, or like how close is the historic mine as well as what you've been drilling recently? How close is it to the town? And why I'm asking this is because I'm thinking, could that be an issue? Could you be too close?
Yeah, it's so we've been drilling like the head frame is literally like from the restaurant there or the Buchans Inn. It's literally like a 5 minute walk to the head frame. Like everything is built around the mine. And so where we've been exploring is sort of in and around the head frame a bit where the resource is, but now more in the latter half of this year, where we stepped out 800 meters to the north in an area that's wasn't mined, and now we're currently drilling just like a kilometer and a half south, and then moving over, 4 kilometers to the west. So we're starting to get some distance. But to answer your question directly, it would be very much like a Val d'Or situation, like with Malartic, where the town is right there. And at least with the resource that's is right now constrained in open pit. Obviously, everything at Buchans was historically underground, thus the head frames. And so the open pit would be different. And so much like Malartic, you would build a berm. And as you pointed out, housing's quite inexpensive there, and so certainly you'd have to buy a couple houses, but you'd build a berm then to separate sort of the open pit noise pollution, as it were, and or activity to separate yourself from the actual where people live.
It's only inexpensive if I don't see the PEA and go and buy 10 houses right before you have to buy them, and then I sell them to you at a higher price. That would be a very industrialist move there. Uh,
That would be a very industrialist move, but unfortunately, it wasn't our PEA. Just to be clear, that was the predecessor company
yep.
way back in 2011. So, you know, probably it would certainly change a lot with the drilling we've done now, and sort of modern metal prices and whatnot. So, yeah, maybe your house purchase decision might not be in the right spot to leverage that
Well, that
opportunity.
is an interesting point, actually. When do you think I'm gonna know though? When do you think you can have that PEA out?
We gotta do a resource first. We have to update the resource. Right now, the resource is 2019 dated, and so obviously copper price in particular has moved a lot, and precious metals, which we do have some credits for in the stock work. And so I think in 2024, get through these 10,000 meters first, see where we land, see what the outlook looks like, and then in 2026 see, whether it makes sense to pull a trigger on a resource update or whether, there's still some low hanging fruit to drill first. So that'll be a 2026 decision.
Talk to me then in that case more about the open pit element of it all and the government, or from the government's perspective. What would it take in terms of permits, albeit environmental or whatever else may have you, in order to make that plan work with an open pit element to it?
Yeah, and so I mean, Equinox is a great example. All of their deposits are conceptualized as open pit, and we have the added benefit on already being on a disturbed site. So it's a brownfield site, which means it's past mining, so it's been disturbed. It's not a pristine environment. There's the hallmarks of old mining sort of everywhere on it, and so the barrier to entry would be much lower because it's actually already a mining lease. So it would, if we're successful here, it would be much more straightforward than Equinox, and that was probably the fastest mine permitting I've seen in North America. I think from the Marathon resource discovery to development here and ultimate first pour was 6 years or just over, something like that.
That is impressive. I think the average is probably close to 20.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But so in terms of tailings or something like that, you wouldn't have issues permitting that, or I mean, community oppositions, because it is, the stigma of tailings, I suppose.
Yeah, and so that's the one. I mean, the head frame is still one of the four head frames is still there. I mean, you probably can't use it. I don't know. I'm not a mining engineer. I shouldn't say that. But one thing that does exist of useful infrastructure, unfortunately, the mill is all gone, is the tailings facility. So certainly you could utilize that. Again, I'm not a mining engineer. This is getting out of my area of expertise, but in sort of what, the internal PA that was done, that would be utilized in the future because it's already existing for any new development.
Well, don't worry, Chris. I'm not a mining engineer either, so you could lie to me and I wouldn't know. What do you think is the biggest challenge or risk for the Buchans project between now and you having answered those unanswered questions that you said, like, oh, that's something for 2026? What's the biggest challenge or risk for you between now and then?
It's really quite simple, Antonio. It's all exploration risk. Right now, we did that gigantic 3D geophysics survey. It was $1.2 million to hopefully help us see through cover and identify, the next major mineral discovery in this former mine project. And so, now we're executing on the targets generated from that and drilling them. So that's the risk here is, we're unsuccessful in making a new discovery, but then, this year we've already made near resource discoveries that will augment the existing resource space. So
that is something that I do want to touch upon. But you also talk about transported ore in your presentation. Maybe you can talk to me more about that in general, but also what I'm really wondering here is how do you predict the location or differentiate the source of the in-situ resource relative to debris flows, essentially? Like, are you getting a better hand on the structural controls now, or is there something else in play that helps you understand what's going on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so we've put a lot of time and effort into understanding the structure because that's the reason, Buchans has come back since shuttering is at the end of the mine life, they started recognizing that everything had actually been thrusted in the southward direction. And what that created an opportunity where the ore horizon that they so successfully mined for 50 years has been repeated multiple times across the project area. And so that wasn't really understood until like maybe the early 80s, and then they shuttered the mine. So they never got out and explored it. And so that's why we completed that big ticket item with the 3D IP, is to get another layer of data over those areas where we have that, or where we think we have, at least it's mapped that way, the repetitions of that ore horizon that haven't been tested. And so that's been, one of the bigger sort of eureka moments, I guess, for the project that might lend itself to making a new discovery. That, along with relogging, 200,000 meters of the 400,000 meters of historic drill core, which is an incredible resource. And then ultimately, it's been about mining the data, because there's so much of it. Almost 100 years. The mine was only open for 50, but exploration in the region, probably 100 years of data. So that's really where AI and machine learning came into it, to do what a human geologist couldn't, at least in an effective amount of time, and really try to highlight areas we should be focusing on, and then ensure our exploration efforts encompass those areas to give us the best chance of making a new discovery.
So maybe it wasn't the risk of field work that pushed you into the CEO position. It was the risk of AI taking over your job. So you're kind of preparing nicely, because I don't think AI can pitch stories as well as CEOs can.
Not yet, though it could probably take what I do and put it into other languages very effectively.
It does. It does it on YouTube. I'm sure people are watching this in a different language. Like, I know German is popular to translate it in, and just for the sakes of it, sometimes I turn it on and I sound even worse than I do in English. So funny, but it does happen. And so what you're drilling, have you drilled more transport dominated targets, or did you first kind of factor into the in-situ sources? How did that work for you?
So first, at the beginning of this year, we were more focused on an in-situ source that we thought some of the transported mineralization was vectoring us towards. It turned out it just kept continuing being transported, which is okay, because the transported mineralization, that's what makes Buchans kind of unique, is 50% of the ore that was mined was actually transported, which means debris flow in this case. So picture like a massive sulfide is essentially a black smoker on the seafloor, at least in this case. And it'll fail or collapse and then be redeposited down across the seafloor. And there's canyons on the seafloor. So, it gets tricky to chase it back. And so the transported mineralization is kind of key to vectoring, oftentimes. But in Buchans, it was almost half the ore they mined, which is unusual in a VMS system. Normally, you have the in-situ mound or black smoker, you mine that. Maybe the stockwork is high enough grade, maybe it isn't. But in this case, the in-situ, the transported was so substantial that there's more tons than there is in-situ material. So the question begs, where did all of this transported mineralization or debris flow mineralization come from? And so that's why we were trying to drill it to vector back to a new in-situ high-grade massive sulfide deposit. And that work is still ongoing, and it's part of our targeting work. But so far, we were only able to successfully just increase the footprint of that transported mineralization, and are still chasing it down plunge.
Buchans is very interesting based on what I saw in prepping for this conversation, as well as what you're telling me here. It seems like it is very interesting, and it also seems like we could do a whole podcast on that alone as well. And maybe we will once you have some of the results, and then we can talk about everything in between. Trying to maybe jump a little bit through topics here, but just thinking about potential risks or stuff like that. When I think VMS, multi commodity VMS, essentially what I'm thinking about is or polymetallic nature of the VMS deposits in general. Metallurgy, that's kind of the one of the first things that pops up for me. Does that worry you in any way?
It would certainly in other VMS systems, and some of the smaller deposits we have south of the lake are going to be certainly more complicated than Buchans, as far as the metallurgy goes. Not impossible. I mean, there's similar to Duck Pond, which was a successful little mine. But Buchans, that's one of the sort of outstanding features, and what made it such a great deposit is it's almost entirely devoid of pyrite, which makes the metallurgy good. You don't have all those deleterious elements, and you don't have to do ridiculously fine grind sizes. And then the mineralization is all in what's called sort of blue-gray ores. And so it produces a really clean concentrate. And that's what sort of why it stands out from other VMS deposits is the metallurgy. It's quite clean. It's an unusual VMS deposit. The only other analog really is Hellier in Tasmania.
I was pretty close to that one, actually. I just want to show off a little bit. That's why I'm telling you. But
I've seen the rocks from it in the Ontario, the Royal Museum there in Ontario, in their rock collection. They have some Hellier rocks, and I looked at it before they even told me it was Hellier, and it was like, this looks exactly like Buchans. But so yeah, normally in VMS, yes, metallurgy is part of the conversation. I mean, it's usually workable, but at Buchans, it's very straightforward, but the challenge, because it is pyrite poor, is that's why previous explorers post mine closure, they would come in and do what all VMS explorers would do, is do like EM or a type of geophysics survey that sort of works well for VMS electrical. So it picks up the sulfide grains, pyrite predominantly, touching each other. They would come in and do big EM surveys, wouldn't find anything, or there'd be no big conductors specifically, and say, okay, there's nothing left here. But because it's pyrite poor, Buchans high grade massive sulfide mineralization is a poor conductor. And so that's why we've gone to doing 3D IP, and we're working backwards, not just from the transport mineralization, but also from the stockwork mineralization, where the stockwork mineralization does have pyrite in it, at least in the halo. And so that would show up in a 3D IP survey. And while that's not really economically significant in the halo, it would show up as a good chargeability anomalant in a big survey like we've completed. And so we can use that then to identify new areas where there's stockwork mineralization that could potentially have fed a high grade in situ massive sulfide mount. And so that's what we're doing right now with the drilling.
I'm glad you're explaining it that way, because when I think IP, I think porphyries and not VMSs. And so,
sure. Yes, it's not the normal course of action. Although with 3D IP systems, it has, like, I think Foran's used it successfly. And it's really, you can get a lot of depth penetration, which is sort of what we're after here, as well as we're going to be looking deeper down, for the most part.
Do you think you might get variability, like lithologically or mineralogically at depth? Like, would it change? Would the metallurgy be different at depth? Is there any indication for that?
No real indication. I don't think I can really comment on that like now. I mean, what will change or will be sort of surprises, hopefully pleasant, maybe some unpleasant, is mapping down 400-600 meters geological mapping. Our understanding of the stratigraphy won't be as good, because there's just not as many drill holes down there, especially in these newer areas. So you could drill down and hit like a magnetic basalt that could be responsible for a chargeability anomaly. So it's part of that is just part of the game. Like you're rebuilding or reinventing the geological map and adding new information. But yeah, this is, I mean, ultimately, this is why we do this. We generate, the best targets that have all the hallmarks of the mine trend as far as geophysical response, geology, the right alteration. But at the end of the day, you're throwing, a core barrel down into the abyss, and you have some control, but it's going to tell you whether you're right or not.
That's essentially part of the game, as you said. That is the game of exploration, I suppose, and coming up with targets and then actually drill testing them and truth testing them, if you will. And
Exactly.
yeah, it'll be good to have catch up conversations on the geological potential and everything that's going on, because Buchans is, as I mentioned earlier, it does look interesting, at least geologically. Just jumping to another thing that does it worry you, kind of thinking about, or what I wrote in my notes here, does timing worry you? I mean, entering the kind of, you as a company going into 2026 and potentially entering that dip of the Lassonde curve, right? Right on essentially on the onset of a bull market. That sounds scary to me, but I mean, you don't look afraid. So how come?
No, because we're exploration stage. Yes, we have resources, so we're still going to be an exploration discovery. And, what we're targeting, Buchans style mineralization, that that would be a incredibly high grade discovery that, if you look at Snowline and Foran discovering Tesla, or even Firefly in their success in and around Maine, is, high grade discoveries, sort of Lassonde Curve doesn't really seem to apply at that point, or at least, we'll still be on the upper trend of it. And then it'll be a while before we've, be able to determine by 2026, hopefully we'll be able to say we have a new discovery and we're proving it out. And then, that'll take time. And then, ultimately you get into sort of the development choice, which is the dip, or the killing fields, I think, as Pierre recently called them. Maybe not so much anymore with this bull market, but no, you can't time the market, and all you can do is do what we're paid to do, and why people invest in us and why I invest in this business is for that big discovery. That my last success was that I invested in was Reunion Gold. And it had all the hallmarks I hated. It had a bloated share structure, like 1 billion shares out. And, in Guyana, which is great jurisdiction, but they made a 7 million ounce, something like that, gold discovery. And so none of the negatives I normally, when I look at a company to invest in, like it didn't matter, because it was a significant discovery, and it was a whatever $1 billion buyout at the end of the day. So with the right deposit discovery, most of those timing and or structure matters. It means potentially maybe you won't. Reunion wasn't a Great Bear because of its structural problems, or the company capital structure. But at the end of the day, it was a win all around.
If I gave you a credit card with a limit to it, and the only condition is that you have to deliver that PA under the limit of the credit card, how much would you want me to set that limit on? Essentially, what I'm asking you is, how much money is it going to cost you to answer that unanswered question?
So, like, how much drilling, and the cost of that?
Yeah, essentially.
That's be at least 30,000 meters, I would think, from where we are today.
What's a meter costing you there?
165 all in right now, but to
Is
get
it,
to the PEA level, you're going to have to probably up that to 200 because you're going to have to do a lot more detailed work on the core as far as met and everything else.
that's
So let's
Canadian?
call it, yeah, 200 Canadian all in.
6 million bucks then.
Yeah.
Yeah. What? How much money do you have right now? Again, I mean, I read that March quarter, but that was a long time ago. You've done a lot since. How much money do you have now?
Probably just shy of 2 million, if not 2 million.
Okay.
Actively drilling though, so actively depleting that.
Yeah.
Uh,
What are you? How much are you budgeting for G&A as well? I mean, I mentioned something like 100, 110,000 bucks a month. Is that where you want to keep it, or what do you see?
Yeah, we like to keep it lean. You know, we were set up during the pandemic, so we never had an office, never had sort of office people, and we've kept it that way to keep the money in the ground. Which is, you know, this business is hard enough with you know, money going into G&A and not actually going into drill meters, and I prefer for, you know, the money we raise to go directly to drilling because discovery will make sort of, you know, the funding piece easier ultimately. And in order to make a discovery, you have to drill. You know, I'm a big fan of Sean Rosen in the Cisco group and the shut up and drill stupid, right? It's just what you have to do, you know, providing you've done all the technical due diligence correctly.
Suds. That's the
Yes.
framework there. That's the right framework in my opinion as well. I
Yeah.
do see that you've done some marketing recently. Do you want to do more now that it's a bull market? Do you want to go and spend more money on marketing, or is that not within what you want to do?
Certainly would like to. I bit I'm cautious with it. I found at a certain phase, maybe a few years ago, digital marketing became more impactful as far as garnering an audience and capturing a new audience, let's say, to be exposed to what we're doing in Newfoundland. And so the dollars recently we've deployed have been sort of more digitally focused. As I don't know, getting onto planes and seeing the same old people in Zurich and London. And you do that maybe like once a year, but like going back again and again to do the same thing, I don't know. But again, as you said, it's a bull market. So at some point, maybe you just do everything, but I don't actually really believe in that. I think you have to be fairly strategic with it. And you know, this year you know, our hard dollars have been more constrained, and so we've been very strategic with deployment and marketing, and so that means not, you know, getting on a plane and going to Europe and doing, you know, chicken lunches or whatever. So I've chosen like maximum impact so that the most amount of people learn about what we're doing in Newfoundland. Hopefully, you know, bought us, you know, back when we were 5 cents, you know, earlier this year, and now I've made the money, and I just want to make as many people money as possible.
Hmm. They don't do chicken lunches in the Buchans restaurant. That's a missed opportunity.
I mean, they do, but getting a large captive audience to Buchans would be a challenge.
Why I'm asking you all these questions here, Chris, about money and how much you have right now, what you want to spend on G&A. It sounds like you don't want to increase the G&A too much, so I would expect that it stays in that. Let's call it 100 to 150. Let's take a broad range there. So that's kind of my expectation. Correct me if I'm getting something wrong, of course. But why I'm asking all that is because I'm thinking, how do you raise money in the future? Is it straight equity? Do you start thinking about a project level deal? Do you try to talk to Neil Adshead and get a strategic type of something, I'm reaching, I know, but yeah, is that something you would be looking for?
Certainly, you know, we'll raise, you know, going forward, raise equity. Whether we've been targeting, you know, one of our targets here for 2025 was to bring in a corporate strategic piece. And so whether that's, I don't think it's really a fit for Canterra as we're sort of we haven't talked about the gold assets so much, but those are earlier stage. And really, I think it's probably more appropriate given, what we're focused on is on the critical minerals side in bringing in, a South 32, a Hudbay, a Bulletin, even a Glencore, who sees what we're doing and our resource base now, and wants to have exposure to that going forward. I will say, I don't think we're in like I wouldn't give Buchans do a joint venture on it. I don't think we're in that market anymore. I think Buchans is a special asset and it's our flagship. And so I wouldn't do that. I see too much prospectivity there. And albeit, on the gold side of things, that's much earlier staged, and I think that's ripe for a corporate partnership. If Alamos or mid-tier to junior producer wants to get into the emerging central Newfoundland orogenic gold belt, that is. We've already seen El Dorado jump in south of Equinox, and then B2 with Omega south of that. So we're the last remaining segment, if you will, of that shear zone that hasn't seen a corporate investment. And so I think that would be a great fit to get the next phase of work there done, which is going to be high risk, top of bedrock, Finland style sampling across our 55 kilometers. So high risk and not sexy market work in the fact that you're just drilling high grade gold or moderate grade gold. It's going to be very early stage sort of workup work that hopefully will generate a target that you can throw a diamond drill at and have a discovery.
Some of the channel samples that the Finnish explorer crews have been doing do get the market's attention. And part of that is the jurisdiction itself. I mean, Finland's really hot right now, of course. And how far do you think you do have to get wilding, though, in order for something like that to be of interest? An option or JV or whatever else it might be. Is it at that stage where you have targets? Does it have to be drilled a little bit at least already, or? Yeah. How much work do you think you have to do on it before it is suitable for a deal?
I think, Antonio, we're there now. We've had early scout drill success in 2021 with, the exact same mineralization style and early sort of grade time widths that you see at Valentine, our neighbors, or the Valentine mine. And now, so the missing piece is, how do you evaluate the next 55 kilometers of that shear zone effectively, cost effectively? And so I think that's exactly what a small, mid-tier or junior producer would look for if they were interested. The challenge is, for a lot of miners is there's no synergies on the island. And so you have to decide you want to be there. And so I think that's the investments you've seen with El Dorado and B2 is they're using those probably to determine whether, this is the next Abitibi or something, and they should be there. And then if they make that determination, where on, this belt do they want to be? So I think there's a lot of that sort of feeling out the jurisdiction going on right now.
Well,
and that kind of prevents, if we were in the Abitibi, I'm sure we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? Or in Nevada even. So, it's just because there's no immediate synergies with any sort of the existing producer, save for Equinox, in having, this makes a ton of sense given everything we're already doing in XYZ jurisdiction.
You might be paying 5 to 6 times more for drilling, though, if you're in Nevada. So that's part of it.
I've worked in Nevada, and it was always touted as being like the cheapest drilling in North America. And when I got there, I was just like the permitting regime, the like having to do notice of intents and having to like lob holes from like one pad, like in fans to get to your actual targets. And then the drilling was like back in those days, like 250 or 275 US dollars a meter. Now I can only imagine it was like, this is the most expensive jurisdiction probably to work in.
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
there's also a lot of gold there. So, you got to pay to play sometimes.
that's fair. There's nothing to argue in that one. What about the again First Nation situation or something like that at Wilding? What does that look like? Other legacy challenges or whatever. Is it clean and workable? Is what I'm looking at. Essentially, if someone stepped in, wanted to do a deal with you, could they be drilling it as soon as well soon, really?
Yeah, like we're drill permitted for both, obviously where we're drilling at Buchans now, and for the Wilding Gold project. We've ensured to tick those boxes. Permitting in Newfoundland on the island, Labrador is a different story, so we'll just leave that aside. But it's the easiest jurisdiction I've ever worked in. We get a drill permit in 2 weeks tops right now, which is just crazy fast. And then, the First Nations piece, that's sort of the sad history on the island of Newfoundland is sort of Europeans, Vikings first, then Europeans thereafter, or whomever, like the Beothic people who were indigenous to the island, were slowly like driven inland and eventually, all of that bloodline perished. And so that makes it much different from the rest of Canada is there's no First Nations land claim settlement on the island. Uh, and so it makes it unique in that respect. So when you actually go to build or permit a mine, your stakeholders are the local communities. But the best part about that is pretty much all Newfoundlanders, if they didn't work at Buchans or Duck Pond or now at Valentine, they mostly travel off island to work in Voisey's Bay, in the oil patch in Alberta, or Baffinland, or the diamond mines. The Newfoundlanders and their own offshore oil. So they love the extractive industries, and that's what most of them are trained to do and do well. And so when you go to that stakeholder negotiations, they're well versed in what you're doing and supportive because all they want is high paying technical jobs that keep them on island. They always say, I just want to stay on the rock. And it's hard to do, which is why, there's a scheduled flight from Montreal to or Voisey's Bay to Montreal to Gander, like every day, and with the oil patch, right? So yeah, it doesn't really get any easier.
Newfoundlanders are just a different breed of Canadians, I suppose. The way you're describing them, and always hearing people talk about them, they just kind of sound different. I don't know. Maybe I'm biased.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but they're definitely like a big Irish influence, right? And so you hear that, and then they have Water Street and in St. John's, which looks like Dublin and and has but they're they're just the nicest people I've ever had the pleasure to work with. They won't say anything bad about anyone, even if you twist their arm. And So it's just been a pleasant place to work in. And the only sort of negative, which is really created, the opportunity for Canterra, Firefly, Equinox, and the like, is it wasn't really looked at previously. Like Noranda did a lot of work in the 80s, in a much different metal price environment, and nothing really systematic since. So much like Yukon in the gold rush from 2008 to 11, you're seeing now like a big influx of explorers, and you're seeing discoveries being made. And so it's an exciting time where, um, you know, previously, there just wasn't systematic good work done, except for Noranda and some others. So there's just not that base layer of data. There's just lots of gaps. And so that's created this opportunity. So yeah, we're having to spend a lot of money to create that base data across all the explorers. But much like Yukon, they had that first wave of discoveries with Underworld, then Kaminak, Casino, and now you're seeing the next wave, a cycle later with Snowline and Cascadia. And so, look for Newfoundland to continue on that track as we get sort of, the base science work down, and then most importantly, bring modern exploration. A lot's changed since, the 80s and early 90s when Noranda was active. And so that's why I think you're seeing companies like Firefly and Equinox just continue to make discoveries, even around sort of knowing things that were known even in sort of the 90s. It's just like modern exploration lets us see through cover much more effectively.
To the point of the Yukon, I didn't ask you too much about infrastructure because I know there's a historic mine, but what's the state of it? So I know that there is infrastructure and I see the pictures and everything, but what's the state of that infrastructure? I mean, running a mine requires different energy and different water rights and everything else. So what does the infrastructure look like for you? And you can talk to me maybe both about Buchans and Wildling. If there are differences, you can tell me about that as well.
Yeah, sure. So at Buchans, as far as useful mining infrastructure, so like a mill, that's gone. Really, the only thing useful is the tailings at this stage. But what it does have is it has all the other, obviously it's in a town, so there's power. That was the existing power put in to service the mine, and obviously water is there. There's water everywhere in Newfoundland. And so the only thing that and is connected to the Trans-Canada Highway, just a 30-minute drive north, on a separate on a highway that connects into the Trans-Canada that crosses Newfoundland or by. And the only other thing that Newfoundland really didn't upkeep was the rail line, and so the Buchans mine did use rail to get to sort of a deep sea port north, and Newfoundland tore up all its rail some time ago. I don't know how long ago, but that's the missing piece. And then Wilding, because Wilding is close to Teck's former Duck Pond mine, Duck Pond had power to it, so it's right there, and we're only a handful of kilometers from the border with Equinox's property, which obviously has building lots of mine infrastructure, has power, and all of that.
Mm-hmm. So
it has all the things.
Yeah, no, it does sound like it it has it. Wouldn't it need some updating though? Again, yeah, kind of just bringing it up to speed, I suppose, for a larger project. And also when you talk about an open pit now versus it was underground and so on, wouldn't it need some updating essentially?
The power they ran modern power long ago into central Newfoundland, so you have all the power you need, and there's new dams since the mine used to operate on just a tiny little dam that produced like a mega, a small amount of power, but it was enough. But now there's modern dams just adjacent to town that sort of feed the town of Buchans, Millertown, and ultimately Equinox. So it's already been done effectively for Buchans. And then with Wilding, you have gravel road access you share with Equinox. So, Equinox did upgrade that, made it wider. But then where we tee off from Equinox, we're getting way ahead of ourselves here, but if we're successful in making a a deposit discovery there, you would need to widen, reinforce that gravel road, make it more robust, and then ultimately tee off power from Duck Pond,
Mhm.
which is probably 5 kilometers away, depending on where the deposit ends up. If we're successful in discovering one.
Right. And the if part is important, and there's always forward-looking statements in these things. That's why there are the disclaimers at the beginning there. But it's been a good overview. I'm just looking through my notes here, Chris, and just thinking about what I'm potentially forgetting to ask. I'm sure there's a lot, and I'm sure people watching and listening will remind me, so that if we do a follow-up conversation, you and I can actually talk about other things that people might want to know more about. When you talk to people, Chris, and at Beaver Creek and back home and whatever, what's the most fair criticism that you get of Canterra right now?
The biggest criticism is, the share structure, although it's less so now, I guess. I don't know. People have become more used to bigger share counts, I would say. I remember last cycle, as soon as you were over 100 million, that was it. You were done, right? A lot has changed for some reason. Maybe wins like Reunion are part of that. And, a lot more Aussie juniors are successful in Canada, Firefly being one of them, that have much bigger share structures. But that's the criticism we get. But, my response to that is like, yeah, okay, we're, even if we make, a tier one Buchans discovery, we're probably going to be more like a Reunion than a Great Bear. That's just maths, right? It's just numbers. But that doesn't mean you're not going to make money. Reunion was like what, a 3 or 4 bagger for depending on where you were, or at least was for me. And so, but yeah, if you're looking for like the early stage, like the next Snowline or Great Bear, that's grassroots and going in and just making a new discovery with 30 million shares out. That's not where we are. We've done 4 acquisitions in 5 years now to consolidate for the first time ever in the central Newfoundland mining district all the metal in the ground outside of the existing or the operating mines plus and not including Duck Pond because Teck won't give it to me for some reason. And so, that's never happened before, and that really allows us to eventually, if we're successful with the drill bit and growing resources, puts us in the position where, someone could come in and take us over and develop a DMS district, much like Flin Flon or Foran, or, Bulletin does in the Bulletin mine area in Sweden. So, yeah, I guess it just depends what you're looking for as an investor and whether that 300 million number suits you or doesn't.
Any plans to roll it back and make that number look smaller?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be cut back. I've never had much luck with rollbacks and then coming out on top. That said, if there's a significant catalyst for us, like, we got a big corporate investment, a big mining company wants to, invest, take 20% or more. And then that might be, a good catalyst that then allows the rollback and everyone can reload. But I think, rollback without a catalyst, that just doesn't sets the company up well. I think you need a significant event that's going to materially change the company. Much like Integra Resources did with acquiring Millennial and then Florida Canyon to become a producer. That was okay. Like the game's changed here. We're now a junior producer, and so you roll it back and then reload new and previous money in there to set the stage for the next move up in market cap.
Yeah, that's generally the consensus on rollbacks. I think that I've seen as well. So it is a good point. What do you think I'm forgetting to ask? What did you come here hoping to talk about that I failed to bring up so far?
Um, I think, I think we've talked about it a lot, but I think, we can't underestimate just how important being in a jurisdiction like Newfoundland is, just to operate and get meaningful work done in a short amount of time. And so, with everything going on in BC and other provinces in terms of permitting timelines and even like getting down to like drilling timelines, you know, money goes a long way in Newfoundland, and so money invested into Canterra, you're going to see a direct result at the drill bit. This year we're not going to have to wait, to get to permit pads in certain places or get permission from 10 stakeholders to do certain things, and you're seeing that bear out in M&A and exploration activity from the big players in Newfoundland now. So you saw Newfound buy Maritime because it's a great jurisdiction. They can build a mine, and that'll give them some optionality while they get to a construction decision at Queensway or Keats or whatever. And then similarly with Firefly, that's they've made rapid progress because of the permitting regime and seeing a lot of provincial and federal government funding, which I think is key. Is whenever I go to St. John's and meet with government officials, they're asking me, "What can I do for you, Chris, to help the process along, make your life easier, and help you make a discovery," which is incredibly refreshing. Normally, it's the opposite. Doing everything they can to slow it down and be unconstructive. And so I just can't undersell that point enough.
Just don't be difficult. That's essentially what you're asking, and that's often a big ask, actually, in a lot of Canadian jurisdictions. But that is it is a good ask, I think. And again, just I think we've been through most of it. I know I've not been too respectful of your time, so I'll try to be that now, and I'll let you go. But I'm hoping we can do this again in the future. And yeah, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Thanks. I really appreciate it, Antonio. It was great to be on. Looking forward to the next time.
And as always, thanks to everyone for watching Resource Talks. I have a couple of more things to say, though. The fact that this company was interviewed here today does not mean that they're necessarily a good or a bad company. I'm not here to endorse nor attack anyone. I am simply here to ask some questions. If you find that I have failed in asking a question that you would have liked to hear an answer to, which will happen as I'm not an experienced interviewer, please let me know, and I will try to correct that mistake in a future interview. As mentioned at the beginning, please understand that mineral exploration and development is an extremely risky business. Losing money is the norm and should be the expectation. This is a very complex sector, and the performance of individual companies typically depends on many different moving particles, including company-specific factors like geology, financing ability, and many others, really, as well as particles that are outside of the company's control, like geopolitics, macroeconomics, commodity prices, and many more, most of which are nearly impossible to fully understand. Moreover, these companies that typically get interviewed on Resource Talks are in the pre-revenue stage, which means they rely on the public markets for the financing of their operations, which could result in shareholder dilution. Furthermore, as a general rule of thumb, you'll be better off understanding that all company communications online, albeit this interview or their website and their presentation and their social media accounts, or even the social media accounts which you thought were your friends and then told you about a stock, everything really that these companies do is intended as marketing. And although I do not make buy or sell recommendations because there is a clear conflict of interest given the nature of my business, many out there do. And you should be aware of that inherent bias, and you should be careful out there. That bias is not always going to be clearly disclosed with everyone out there. So it is safer for you anytime you're watching any type of company-specific content to approach it with a dose of skepticism and assume that the party telling you about it is biased in at least some shape or form, because there will always be a bias, again, albeit clear or not. So always ask yourself what the incentive of your counterparty is and never rely on them regardless of their incentives, but instead double check if what they're saying is true, again, by using setterplus.ca. The fact that I have no idea what I'm doing should already be clear to you at this point. I am not saying this to make jokes or laugh with myself. I just simply do not have a long enough track record of consistent investment profits. So I should under no circumstances be considered an authority on anything. Again, although this may sound amusing to you, believe me, it is not amusing and it is not intended as a joke. I'm simply pointing out a fact and warning you not to rely on anything I do or say. Unfortunately, at least to my understanding, nobody out there has any special abilities. The CEOs do not possess any superior knowledge, and they cannot know about what will go up, what will go down, or what will go in circles. Some people even believe that to be rule number one on Wall Street. Nobody really knows. None of us know whether any of the company's activities will result in a success, again, given that we're talking about high-risk activities where most of the times it ends in failure. So unfortunately, try as I may, I won't always catch all red flags or all challenges with the companies. So even if I did ask a few tough questions in here, don't rely on this being all of the tough questions. Again, these are complicated startups with many moving parts, and I am conflicted given the nature of this business. Therefore, I cannot guarantee the quality of anything presented in this video, and you cannot hold me responsible for any losses or damages stemming from the way you decide to use this interview. Viewers, listeners, and readers acknowledge and agree that the information presented herein did not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security or investment or to participate in any trading strategy. Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business strictly disclaim any and all liability for losses and or damages, whether direct, indirect, special, or consequential, or other consequences, however so caused, arising out of any use or reproduction of the content published by Resource Talks or any decision made or action taken in reliance upon it. By consuming this content, all consumers vow to release Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business from all claims, proceedings, or consequences. This is all to say, I know it's a lot of lawyer talk, but this is all to say that you shouldn't blindly trust me or anybody on the internet, and you should do your own research. Once again, social media is meant for entertainment. It is setterplus.ca where you do your research. That's where you'll find a company's official filings, and I encourage you to read and analyze the Management Information Circular, the financial statements, the Management Discussion and Analysis, and whenever available, the NI 43-101 technical documents. If you don't understand everything in those documents, the chances of you losing money are even higher than they normally are in this space. And as mentioned earlier, the chances of even the best analysts in this sector losing money are extremely high, since this is venture capital and it is not for everybody. I'll leave you with one of Charlie Munger's quotes, which I wish I had listened to more often earlier on, which says, quote, "If you don't understand it, don't do it."